to Sheep Chats. We're so glad you're here. Thanks for joining us today. Oh, I got some feedback. Just never know. It's technology. Something bad could happen. Something good can happen. Every time we show up, I'm just like, yes, it worked for me today. I'm Brittany Sweeney. I'm the communications manager with the Livestock Conservancy. Unfortunately, Cindra couldn't be here today. She's very sad because she was really looking forward to talking to our special guest, Melinda Ellison. Hi, Melinda. Thanks for joining us today. But she should be back next week, hopefully, as we chat more about sheep. Well, no, actually, next week is Marketing Monday, so it'll be me and Samantha Casson from Fact. Anyway, as I ramble on, we're here to say thank you to Melinda for joining us to talk about winter sheep. It's supposed to be winter time, but it feels 70 here. So Melinda, thank you so much for joining us. Do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do?
Sure. So I live in Salmon, Idaho, and I am in winter right now. So we'll just keep that to ourselves, I guess. But I work for the University of Idaho as the range livestock and sheep extension specialist. And so what I do is a statewide appointment to visit with people about grazing livestock and sheep production and that type of thing. I also do some research related to those areas as well. And I have my own little flock of sheep as well that I run on the side. I'm sure there's a lot of people on today that do the same kind of thing, and it can be kind of challenging during lambing season, which I'm right now in the very tail end of lambing season. So hopefully all my information is not just frustration for you guys to hear, but it's been a good season for me so far. And I don't know what else you wanted from my introduction, but there we go.
That's perfect. That's awesome. Yay. I'm sorry it's so cold there. Before we jump into questions, I'm just going to say a real quick shout out to Mana Pro. Thank you for sponsoring Sheep Chats today. We appreciate you. I'm going to play a quick 1-minute video from them, so please stick around for 60 seconds. That's it. And then be right back to chat more with Melinda.
Champions, colleagues,
roommates,
and personal trainers.
Whatever role they play,
they're an important part of our lives.
In their quiet way,
and their not so quiet way.
They keep us young.
On our feet,
on the go.
They pull us back to nature.
And push us toward the next adventure.
And as much as we count on them,
they count on us all the more.
To nurture their lives.
With the same commitment.
To protecting them.
Helping them grow.
And thrive.
Treating them.
As well as they treat us. By giving them a little more of our lives.
Because no matter what role they play,
out here
or in here,
we're here to make their lives the best they can be.
Mana Pro, nurturing life.
Thanks for sticking around, and thanks to Mana Pro. We appreciate your support, and thank you for featuring a bunch of amazing heritage breeders in your promo this season. We appreciate that. That's awesome. Look for the show notes. You can go to the link and see their Nurturing Life page and learn more about each of those breeders. So big thank you to them. But even better, more exciting is Melinda. Thanks for being here today. We're so glad that you're still here to chat about sheep with us. If anybody has questions, go ahead and type them into your Facebook comments. And if you're listening to this later or watching it later, we'll try and get those questions answered if we can. But first, Melinda, how did you get started with shepherding and working for Extension? What's your story?
My story is that I grew up on a beef cattle ranch in Colorado, and we raised around 350 head of Angus Hereford cross cattle at high elevation. So our base ranch was at 8,000 feet. When I went to school, I stayed in the animal science side of the world. And while I was in school, I was also mildly broke, of course. And so to stay in the livestock industry, I thought I should try sheep out for a little bit. And I worked in my grad programs at the Sheep Center at the University of Wyoming. And so I kind of just got where I really enjoyed working with sheep. They're a much easier, cheaper way to stay in the livestock world. And I find that they have such big personalities and they're a lot of fun to be around and work. And so me and my 2 border collies, we work this little flock of sheep. I have about 30 head of breeding stock. And so I continued that after I went to my current job, which is in Idaho. And I wanted to go into extension because I enjoy learning and teaching and working with producers. I did not want to teach students. So this is where I landed as far as extension goes. And so I've been really enjoying the producers I get to work with, both cattle, sheep, and actually goats to some degree as well. I've been working with one of my colleagues, Carmen Wilmore, in Idaho, and she raises the herd of dairy goats. And so she and I are kind of the small ruminant specialists here. So we do webinars and we put out, articles, and we have a YouTube channel. So all the stuff that I'm going to talk about with you guys today, you can get a much broader view of that at our YouTube channel. Watch any of our past webinars on any of these topics. And so just a shameless plug there, but you're welcome to check us out there and follow us on Facebook. And we bring a monthly webinar as well. So any opportunity to learn, I always feel like I just want to share. And I'm really, really grateful to be here and meet a whole new group of people that I may or may not already be talking to. So
that's awesome. Yes, if you are listening in, it's University of Idaho Extension Livestock. If you Google that with YouTube at the end, then it should come up. So please do check it out. All the great information. All right, so it sounds like you get to go and do all the fun stuff. So that's pretty awesome. So we'll just jump into some lambing questions. When do you typically lamb, and what are the average temperatures, snowfall when you're lambing?
Well, like I said, I'm kind of the tail end of lambing. I started right at the beginning of February. Here in Salmon, we're at about 4,000 feet. We don't get a lot of snow. On a really, really high snow year, we might have a couple feet sitting on the river floor. And here it's very steep. All the mountains around us, they get a lot of snow. But at the bottom drainages, we don't get a whole lot. I think our area gets 13 inches of moisture a year. And a lot of that is in spring rain and that type of thing. So at the beginning of lambing this year, we got about 6 inches of snow, and it hasn't done any more moisture since then. And my first 10 days, it was below 0 at night. It's warmed up some the second and third week. So we've been kind of in the 20s and 30s in the night and then in the day. And now we're back in the negative temperatures. So in Idaho, I would say I'm not a common lambing time. Most of the big producers especially won't lamb until at least April 1st. And it depends a lot on what their range is going out in the summer. If they have public lands, the state of Idaho is majority public lands when it comes to rangeland. So we have to adhere to certain schedules as far as when we're allowed to graze and that type of thing. And so a lot of the guys will lamb early April into early May so that the lambs are big enough to go out on range. But it's still warm enough that they're not dealing with these idiotic below 0 temperatures like I am. And like I said, I'm a little off schedule, but for me with work, this is the timing that fits the best. And I also try to finish, I sell direct to consumer. So I try to finish my lambs at about 10 months, which would put the finish date right before Christmas for me. And that works out really well because I don't have to feed lambs through the winter. So
nice. This might be a dumb question, but do you find any kind of difference between like high elevation where you are and the people that aren't at elevation?
I don't really have experience at low elevation for lambing specifically. I think that there's always challenges when you have really cold weather, of course. I mean, that's an obvious challenge. But then Areas where you're actually a little bit warmer but moist, probably some challenges with things like pneumonia and issues that could happen because of that warmer weather. Like I said, I've not experienced lambing at lower elevation, but I have experienced lambing in Laramie, Wyoming, which is where I was before here. And I'll tell you what, the wind is miserable, regardless of what elevation you're at. So it's, I think there's a lot of obvious challenges and probably some more subtle ones that I probably just don't have the experience to speak on. So.
Sure. Well, you mentioned pneumonia. Let's see. There's the right question. Do you want to talk a little bit about lambing emergencies and how you handle them?
Sure. Maybe I'll try to go a little bit chronologically and hit some of the bigger ones because there's obviously a million ways it can go wrong.
Sure.
For me, the very first emergency, which can actually be handled preventatively, is things like pregnancy toxemia. So if our animals are not in a very good nutritional status going into pregnancy, starting, and then going into that late pregnancy stage, we can really run into some metabolic issues that can cause some problems. And so I have on my little farm experienced pregnancy toxemia twice. It's not fun. It's a lot of work. You spend a lot of time working with your animals to keep them nourished enough to get them through. And in one scenario, I was able to get her through and lambed out. And the other scenario, she was too far gone. And a lot of the issues that I've run into have been parasite driven. And so that's another thing that, it's a sensitive topic because of all the resistance issues that you can run into. But if you're in an area where you have high parasite load, in my case, it's liver flukes. And so just making sure that you're cognizant of that and trying to address it. And for me, I had moved here, my animals weren't used to them, and I had some unfortunate losses that way, just because I had some ewes that couldn't handle the load. So I guess it's not really a lambing emergency, but you're going to hit some snags if you move to a new place than where you were at before. Or if you bring ewes from somewhere else in that are not used to your area. So going into actual lambing emergencies, I think that it's really important when you have ewes that are coming close to due that you're checking them pretty regularly. I mean, we all know that. For me, when it's minus below zero, I check every 2 hours all night long, because if the lambs are born and they don't get up and get going, it takes less than 20 minutes for them to freeze. So it's a lot of work to save everything, but those are the challenges we have as livestock producers. So, my rule of thumb with sheep is once they start looking like they're in labor, you give her 1 or 2 hours and her water sac should break. And at that point in time, if she's not making active progress within 30 to 40 minutes, this is when it's a good time to go in with your hand. It's really important to do everything you can to have a clean environment. So, get some disinfectants, some antimicrobials, not antibiotics. Go in with a glove, that type of thing. Just try to keep it really clean, because if she's having trouble and she's having a stressful parturition anyway, and then we introduce an extra factor, which could be infection, that's, sometimes we have not very much time and we have to get in fast, but anytime that you can, do as clean a measures as you can. At this point, the obvious sign is front feet forward with the head in between the legs and having a proper presentation. Honestly, if I go in to check, I usually just go ahead and help her out, as long as she's dilated enough and things are in good shape, because she's been struggling probably for a little while, and you're there, you might as well get them all out and make sure they're okay. So just be very gentle. When pulling lambs, if you get them in the proper position, you want front feet and head and come out together. If they are breech, it doesn't hurt to pull them backwards, but make sure you pull them, because if their umbilical cord breaks before they're able to breathe, that's when you run into trouble that way. But you just pull with contractions. You know, you don't have to yank it out all at once. Give her a chance to work with you, and you want to pull downward away from her back end, because that's the presentation that would be natural for her to give birth to a lamb. Let's see, other emergencies. When it comes to the lambs themselves, a million things can go wrong there too. The worst case scenario is you're not there right at the moment and she has a lamb and she doesn't get that sac off of its face and it is unable to breathe at any point. That's not super common when you have experienced ewes, but it can happen with either poor mothers or with yearlings that it's their first time lambing. So that's one that if you're not helping, it can still happen. And so it's a good idea to try to, if she's actively lambing, stay up with her. You don't have to be right there, but they should drop to the ground, and within a few seconds, they're shaking their head and wiggling about. So if that's happening, you're probably in pretty good shape. For me, if they lamb and I'm not there, or even if you are there, I guess, if they lamb naturally, there's circumstances where lambs just don't have the vigor to get going. There's a number of reasons for this. One would be a difficult birth that, discouraged the animal from having that vigor. Poor mothering can play into it. Maybe they have some issues with mineral imbalance, which I think we should touch on at some point, but I won't hound on it now. But, balanced minerals in gestation are very, very important. And whenever you have issues like white muscle disease, which is a selenium vitamin E deficiency, these lambs can be born very weak and they don't have the vigor and they don't want to get up. And typically you're going to have to help them out and probably provide some kind of supplement like a BOCI or whatever to get them going. Another thing that I do if they're just really dragging and not moving, I'll just go hit them with some Nutri-Drench, 2 or 3 squirts of that. Or if it's really cold out and they're not making much progress, I'll just go ahead and get them fed. Sometimes I'll tube them depending on how weak they are. But if you can keep them warm enough to get going in those cold temperatures, then you have a chance at them being able to make that move on their own. So in a temperature that's not that cold, I like to see them being up and at them looking for milk within 20 minutes and usually fed by 30 or 40. That's kind of my rule of thumb, as long as it's not bitter cold outside. So I'm sure there's a million other things that can go wrong.
Well, it's so hard to cover everything when there's just anything and everything can go wrong.
Yeah.
But let's
the ticket is to have some good information and understand what could go wrong and having the right tools available when they do, or even an advisor of some kind that you can call. My poor veterinarian hears from me at 10 p.m. sometimes, because I'm like, oh my gosh, I don't know what to give this little guy. And, I've been doing this for 15 years. So there's no shame in not knowing all the answers. It's a matter of being able to have somebody to call, whether it's your neighbor that raises sheep, or if you're multi-generational, you have your grandpa or whatever. But and then there's a lot of really good resources in books and online, and there's a lot of ways to find answers to things these days. So
absolutely, you can't state it enough how important a mentor is and how important it is to have a resource to call or look and all of that as you're getting ready, because something will happen. Well, let's bring that back. Nope, that's not the right question. What are some of those recommendations you have as people are prepping for lambing in winter conditions?
Sure. For me, the first and most important thing is to make sure that they're fed at the right nutritional level. With sheep especially, it's interesting because raising cattle, their nutrient requirements do increase some when they go into late gestation and lactation. But with sheep, it can be double or triple, depending on how many lambs they have on board, what their requirements are coming into that last month or so of gestation, 4 to 6 weeks. And then lactation, even a bigger jump because they make such dense milk for their lambs. So it's really important to know that you're providing the proper amount of protein and energy. And a lot of times this doesn't come from just grass hay or just alfalfa hay. And it's really important to balance a ration that meets all those requirements. And additionally, all the critters, but sheep especially, really require a good balanced mineral package as well. And I spoke on one of my YouTube videos, so go ahead and watch it, but for over an hour on just mineral things that can go wrong, right? And barely scratch the surface. So if you are uncomfortable with balancing a ration or choosing a mineral package, myself or a number of other sheep specialists around the country have experience doing that and are willing to help you. So make sure that you use the resources you have available to you to make sure that you're meeting those requirements. So that's the first and foremost. When it gets cold, you have to bump those requirements even a little bit more, depending on, how cold is it? How wet is it? How windy is it? And this is where things like shelter can play a role, because if it gets really cold and they're able to get out of the conditions, then that decreases the demand that they have for nutrients. And I will remind everybody that any mammal, any living being, if they are threatened their own personal ability to survive, reproduction is the very, very last thing it's the first thing to go, I guess is what I'm trying to say. So if they are malnourished, or if they have an imbalance of any kind, or it gets really miserable cold outside, all of those nutrients are going to be directed to maintaining life in that animal. And so if it gets bad enough, then those lambs are either going to suffer loss of life, or they're going to come out weak and not able to do anything. So it's not always, a mineral deficiency that causes weak lambs. It can also be a lack of nutrition. And so shelter to me would be, if you're in a windy place, have a nice windbreak for them. Or if you're in a really cold place, lay down some straw to bed them in. And mature ewes are not going to struggle as badly in the cold weathers, especially if they have a full wool, a full fleece on. That really helps them be able to withstand some pretty severe weather. If they're full fleece, anything under 0 degrees, you want to supplement some extra, but pretty much otherwise they're going to be fine. But it's the lambs then, because they're small and weaker, and they don't have a big full fleece. And if their mother is a good mother, she's going to protect them. But let's be honest, all ewes are not good mothers. So providing some, warm bedding or a roof if it's a rainy or snowy area, or, just providing them the opportunity to get out of that weather. A barn, to me, is one of those things that you have to decide what your investment will be. So for me, I do shed lamb. I have all my ewes come in after they have lambs, but it's very intensive and you spend a lot of time with them. And I'll tell you that I just, from my own personal 30 animal flock, I usually take between 2 and 3 weeks off during lambing just to be with them, because it's so intensive. So if you're in a place where having that is important, and what it does is provide you better bonding, better mothering, you typically have a much higher chance of saving lambs when something goes wrong, and it's a lot of investment of your time, but you usually will see the income on the other end. But it's not for everybody. And so if you're in a place where you're not constantly having to live with them, or if it's 70 degrees when you're lambing, you're probably fine to just let them lamb, So it's very dependent on, your operation in your area as to whether building that infrastructure is really important. But for me, I think the most important thing to keep in mind, especially if you're new to having sheep, or you're in a place where you want to get better at it, is having facilities to handle those animals. We've all been in the scenario where we have to do something and we catch her, and then we have to find a halter and tie her up and screw around, and she's throwing herself and she's falling down. And I mean, if you have the facilities where you can actually put her in somewhere and contain her so that you can do the work you need to do without breaking yourself, and your veterinarian, if she ever has to come, will also be grateful. Those are the big ones for me as far as going into winter with sheep, especially in cold areas. So
Yeah, so set your ladies up for success and set your veterinarian up for success.
That's right. And yourself. Let's be honest. 3 a.m. is my least favorite time to catch a sheep.
That sounds like not a fun time. Excellent. Let's see. I think Cindra had some specific questions for specific scenarios. So, what would be the best action to take with a newborn lamb that isn't breathing?
Yeah, so this one is it's relatively straightforward. If you have an animal of any livestock species, if they are born and not breathing, and it could be because they had the sac over their nose, or they just didn't get that breath when they came out, or whatever it is, basically you block the mouth and you plug one side of the nostril and you blow into the other side and try to get them to start taking that breath on their own. The one thing that I'll caution people with sheep is that most diseases that sheep have are zoonotic, meaning that they spread from the animal to people. If an animal is having bad luck at lambing, especially if the animal came early or something's wrong, it could be a disease-related situation. So you want to be really cautious, focus on biosecurity here. And sometimes, and I'm guilty just like everybody, if the lamb's not breathing, oh my God, blow into its nose. If at all possible, use a straw or something like that so that you don't have that fetal placenta mouth contact, because that's really dangerous. And especially if you're pregnant, don't do that. But yeah, I'll just have a straw in hand nearby, and you can just fit it in their little nostril and blow. And sometimes the luck is there and sometimes it's not. So and if you have a stethoscope or something and you can listen for a heartbeat, that if there's no heartbeat, there's no breathing. I mean, that's just, so sometimes it's futile. But the other thing is if they're just struggling to breathe and you give them that additional breath into their lungs, and you can kind of rough them up a little bit. In a good mama, she's going to be kind of licking them and, pawing at them, and, you can grab them and shake them around and scrub on them. And I like to get a towel and just rub them like they're a wet dog, and try to get them going that way. So anymore, I think the advice is to not grab them by their hind feet and swing them, because there can be some issues with the lungs that way. So, but there's a lot of people that also think that that's the way to go. So I guess that's your own personal preference, whether you want to do it or not. But it's not veterinary recommended anymore. So
that's good to know. So add a straw and a towel to your lambing kit.
Yep.
Just in case.
Yeah.
So wintertime, you can get really chilled. What's an effective way to warm a chilled lamb?
So the number one thing in this scenario that you need to have for equipment is a little rectal thermometer. I carry it in my coveralls pocket. So whenever I'm out there, if anybody looks a little chilled, which can mean a number of things, right? They're laying out, not actively seeking milk. Put your finger in their mouth. If their mouth or their tongue is kind of chilled or cool, it should be pretty warm to the touch. The first thing I do is just take a rectal reading. If we're looking at lambs between, I think it's 101 to 103, that's the normal range for newborn lambs. So if they are anything under that, it's important to go ahead and get them warmed up before you intervene in any other way. So I've had a number of lambs that didn't register on my thermometer that I was able to save, which means they were under 90 degrees, which is near death. It's pretty terrible. The last thing you ever want to do with a lamb that cold is give them anything to eat. Don't tube them, don't do anything, because they can't utilize that when they're that cold anyway. My go-to way to warm up a chilled lamb is to put them in a sink or a bathtub with water. You have to sit there with them, hold their head out of water. But start with room temperature water and just gradually increase the water temperature until, I like to say, at least 97 to 98. And then I'll put them in front of a cadet heater. I bring them in my house. I do it in the bathroom. But I have a nice cadet heater in my bathroom. I crank that all the way up. I lay them on a heating pad, like the one for your back, and then put a towel over that. And then I actually, in the last year or so, one of the things that I discovered that's really handy, and I don't know what all brands make this. Mine is Columbia. It's that sort of metallic lined coat that feeds the temperature back to your body. I just put one of those over the top of my lambs and let them sort of get up to temperature. So once they hit, 98-ish or better degrees, that's the time where you can ask them to try to suckle. A lot of times they're warm enough now that they will. They're hungry and they're ready to eat something. And sometimes they won't, so you might have to tube them at that point. But I think 100% just put them in water and let them warm up. It helps decrease any chance that they have of, warming up too quickly or not warming up quickly enough. And it just helps. I've had lambs that I can get them warmed up in the sink in 15 to 20 minutes. And I've had some that an hour and 15 minutes later, they're so dang cold, it just took that long to get there. So it's a patience game. But it's worth it because you're saving a life, one that would not have been saved without you, which is always way better than the ones that die anyway. And there was nothing you could have done. So,
Sure, absolutely. Well, on the flip side, what does frostbite look like in a lamb, and how would you treat that?
Most of the time that I've experienced frostbite, it's just dang cold outside. And I can't say that I've ever treated frostbite, and I have not had it since I've been in Idaho on any of my lambs. As long as they're being well fed and well taken care of by their mamas, they should be okay. A lot of the ones that get frostbite are the ones that I'm talking about, where you come up on them, they're flat out, they look like they're dead, but there's a heartbeat, there's breath, but it's a really cold baby. And so those guys can get, and I think the biggest thing there is to just give them that care they need to get back up to temperature and make sure at that point that mama's taking them back and that they're eating enough and they're staying warm. And I would say, you want to get your eyes on all of your lambs at least a couple times a day to make sure there's no, illness or injury or dehydration or starvation. But especially with any lambs that you've had to bring in and warm up, you want to check on them pretty regular, every 3 or 4 hours for the first 3 or 4 days, I would say would be realistic, because when they're that itty bitty tiny and they've had that stress in their life already, a lot can happen fast, and you don't want to have to warm them up twice.
Yeah.
So as far as treatment, I don't know. I don't know if there is a treatment. I'd have to look it up. But
that's okay. We'll ask a mentor. You talked a little bit about dehydration. What are some signs of that, and how would you treat it?
Yeah, so dehydration and starvation look very similar in baby lambs. They probably will seem fine for a while, and it depends at what level they're being starved or dehydrated, which is kind of one and the same in those really early days. There's a lot of reasons that it can be happening, whether they're being rejected by their mom, or they are not getting enough milk because she's not making enough, or she's got mastitis, or whatever it may be. And that's why I say you want to look at your lambs at least a couple times a day and get your eyes on every single one of them, because a healthy lamb, you walk out in the pen and they're going to jump up and run around and find mom. And if you see one that's sort of laying down and you walk over, they should jump up and run from you, right? So if they're kind of listless and they just sort of get up, or they don't get up, or whatever, that's a pretty good indicator that they're either sick or hungry. They also kind of get sort of a hunched back. They walk like they have a sore back sometimes. And the fullness in their belly, you want, when you see them, you don't want to see their ribs sticking out. If they have good milk coming in, they may not be like full, but they're not going to be indented in that belly region. And a lot of times, if it's a lamb that you've intervened with before, they're going to start chasing you around and asking you for help and milk. And so if that's the case, that's pretty easy to tell. And one of my rules of thumb is, if you catch them before they get really bad, which hopefully you do, but not always. And at that point, you need to check temperature and maybe get them warmed up, because they get cold pretty fast when they're dehydrated. But my rule of thumb is, a lamb that is not hungry will not ever suckle off of a bottle. So you might have to fight with them, but typically what I do is I work with them. I make sure they're getting some milk. They get the idea that there's milk coming from this bottle. And if they won't eat, they won't eat. Try back again in a couple hours. And if you try 3 or 4 times and they won't eat anything, they're probably okay. And just keep an eye on them. If they are famished and they suck down everything you gave them in a bottle, they're hungry. So at this point, you have to make a decision about, do I get mom in, check her bag for mastitis, check that she's making milk. Maybe she's just a bad mama, not bonding with her baby. Maybe she rejected him. Maybe he's not vigorous enough to go after the milk. So that's a good time, whether you shed lamb or not, to have a facility set up where you can bring them in and watch them pretty close. And then just offer milk, and as long as they're taking milk from a bottle, you need to keep feeding them. And if they're not taking milk from a bottle, they're probably going to be okay. So there's rocket science in all this, of course.
Of course. Well, speaking of bottle babies, what do you do with the bottle lambs on your ranch?
For me, I raise them because by the time, if you put a bag and a half of milk replacer into them, I still make that back in my operation because I sell direct to consumer. So the whole operation, start to finish, is on my place. It's not always something for everybody, because for one, if you have a big enough operation, that becomes really expensive, and you may not recover that when you sell weaned lambs, maybe to a feedlot or whatever you do with them. So that's why a lot of the big producers won't raise the lambs, and they'll sell them, to whoever wants them for $25 or $50. But like I said, I raise mine. I typically, for the first week, I will feed them on a schedule. So the first couple of days, every 2 or 3 hours, and then every 4 or 5 hours, and then et cetera, until they're about a week old. And I will start them I have a couple of buckets with nipples in them. So I'll try to get them started on those buckets as their source of where they find their food. But it typically takes till they're 10 or 12 days old before they're willing to drink cold milk. So the main thing there is to make sure that you're providing warm milk often enough. Once they hit the point where they're willing to drink milk out of a bucket, whether it's warm or cold, then you can provide milk to them, twice a day, once in the morning and once in the evening, and they feed on it the way that they would off their own mom, and they grow really well. I've been very happy with my results. The other thing I do, of course, because it's so cold here, one of my buckets is built into a heated bucket, and I do keep them in the barn. But you can train lambs to a dog door, it turns out. So typically once they're on the bucket really well, I'll start training them on that dog door, and then they can go out with the flock and hang out and play and run around. And then when they're hungry, they come back in for milk. So that's how I handle it. It's pretty time intensive in the first couple of weeks, but then everything is pretty easy from there. So, and then of course, creep feed. That's, you get them started on creep feed right away. They won't eat it till they're 2 or 3 weeks old, but if they have access to it the whole time and they start to get on it, you won't have any issues with digestive upset. I don't have access to a good creep feed in our town. So I do like a 3-way corn oats barley with molasses plus some soybean meal. I do like 15% soybean meal for the protein, and then 85% of whatever grain. And then I also just provide free choice alfalfa. So the lambs get on feed pretty well by 6 to 8 weeks, and I usually wean about 10 weeks.
Great. Dog door. I love it. I never would have thought of that.
They learn it just like a dog, too. It doesn't take long at all.
That's amazing. Do you want to take some questions from people?
Yeah, that'd be great.
All right. Hi, Nan. Thanks for joining us today. We're glad you're here. Nan says, I had a lamb who was breathing at first, but then stopped. When I started CPR, I could hear she had fluid in her lungs and she died. What should I have done?
Well, I think a scenario where a lamb drowns is really unfortunate, and it's hard to stomach. A lot of times there's not a whole lot you can do. And I guess if you have more information on this, I'd be interested to hear, did you try to feed the lamb, or was it already having fluid in its lungs from something else? If you had not fed the lamb anything and it still had fluid in its lungs, it probably inhaled something during the birthing process. And at that point, once it's in there, it's in there. And honestly, if it would have lived, you probably would have been dealing with some kind of pneumonia issue with it. So in a way, that's really tough. If you did try to feed it, I think the big thing there is sometimes they're just not smart enough to live. But then also, you can do techniques when you're trying to feed a newborn where you massage the throat. So you kind of manipulate that swallow reflex to help them actually swallow rather than just inhale. It's just tough. I think that fluid in lungs is just a really tough one, and it's pretty poor prognosis. So I'm sorry that happened.
We're sorry, Nan, but it sounds like there wasn't much you could do. Thank you for your question. If anybody has more questions, go ahead and write them in. We'd love to have Melinda answer them for you. While people are thinking of their questions, what are some good places for folks to learn more about some of the techniques or winter management that you have talked about today?
Sure. Like I said, we have our YouTube channel where we have had like 80 or 90 different videos that we've recorded for webinars on different topics. I've done a number of talks myself on winter management, and we have a really extensive, equipment that you need for lambing video on there. There's no way in an hour that we could have talked about all this and that, but it's a very inclusive discussion of what you might need. So there's a number of opportunities if you want to watch videos that we've done. Certainly feel free to follow our Facebook or get on my email list, because we share a lot of opportunities for just regular learning, webinars, different things, newsletters, articles, that type of thing. One of my favorite personal resources that I use a lot is Story's Guide to Raising Sheep. It's a book that you can get on Amazon. I think they have one for almost every species, but it is one of my absolute favorites because it's written by somebody who raised sheep forever and ever. And it's written in a way that you can understand it and you can easily access the point that you're looking for. And there's a lot of tricks that she talks about that can help you out. So that was like my sheep Bible when I started raising sheep, because it's just right there, easy access.
Absolutely. Yeah, we actually saw it on our website. So if people want to go there, it's just conservancy.org. We love Story and we love their raising guides. They're pretty amazing. Sorry, I interrupted you.
No, you're fine. I will, I have no investment at all. I don't get money for promoting that one, but it's my go-to. There's a lot of great resources from different extension folks around the state. University of Maryland has a really nice page with a bunch of information. There's, I don't know who puts it on. It's the Sheep 101 and the Sheep 201 web resource. But, I think that having like that advisor that we talked about is important if you can find one. Gosh, you can email me at any time. If I'm awake, I will answer. But there's a lot of things, and a quick Google search does a lot for you as well. When, especially those deals, one for me, I had a ewe that this year she had lambs. She was feeding them, loving them, taking care of them for 2 or 3 days, and then all of a sudden, she just decided she hated one of the twins, and she started beating them up all the time. And I was like, I have never seen this before. I don't know what to do about it. And so for me, I just, I Googled it, and there's some forums where people had experienced that. And you just have to be careful about the information you get, make sure it comes from somewhere credible. And certainly if you find information that you're not sure if it's credible, reach out to somebody, an extension or one of your advisors or something like that.
Absolutely. Those are all great resources. Let's see. Nan wrote us back. Nan says, thank you, Melinda. I hadn't had a chance to try and feed her, and it was my first lambing, so I felt pretty terrible. Appreciate you telling me it wasn't my fault.
Yeah, if it happens before you do anything to intervene, it is not your fault. I can promise you that. And sometimes the biggest thing to remember is that we are only in so much control. We are not God. We cannot save everything. And there are days that I have felt like, man, I put all this time and I spend all this time with these sheep and I still lost that one, or I still have this or that problem. And the reality is there's just only so much you can do. So you have to take the big wins, the ones where you found that lamb and he was almost dead and you warmed him up and got him fed and now he's out with mom and he's doing really great. Those are the ones to hold on to, because you're just not ever going to save everything. And it's hard to stomach when you're in the middle of losing something, but
it's emotional.
But we do it for the wins, right?
Yes. Let's celebrate the wins. Don't beat yourself up. Give yourself lots of grace. It is heartbreaking. So
yes.
And we've all been there, and it's okay.
And let's be honest, it would have even been more heartbreaking if you were able to save him and then 2 or 3 weeks later he died of pneumonia. So I mean,
Absolutely.
That's happened to me too. Not that specific thing, but one that seemed like it was starving, and I was feeding it and I was doing everything I could. And a month later, he died anyway. And there's things that go wrong internally sometimes, and there's just not much you can do about it.
Thank you for sharing your story, Nan. We appreciate you. Hi, Robin. Thanks for joining us today. Robin says, what is the best way to pregnancy test ewes? Blood test? Is there a urine test that is accurate?
Yeah. So there are blood tests, and most big producers don't do blood tests just because they're can be a little expensive. I don't have a number on top of my head, but if you're a small enough producer that it makes sense to spend, 10 or $15 to find out pregnancy. I think it's a yes or no test though, so I'm not sure you're going to get information on, how far along she is or that type of thing. Maybe, I guess I don't know, but I think it's a yes or no. I typically call my vet to come do ultrasound. She can tell me, I don't ask her to do twins or triplets or whatever. But I have her, let me know, is this animal pregnant and how far along does she think she is? And that gives me a good idea, because at that point I can say half of this half of animals are going to probably lamb early. And then you can tie that in with, as they start to bag up and start to look like they're going to lamb, you can manage them however you need to that way. There are other lower input methods that are mostly accurate, which would be to put a chalk harness on your rams. You can put different colors on different rams. If she's getting bred, she'll have chalk marks on her butt, and sometimes, not always, you can tell which ram sired or bred her. And typically, I'll go ahead and leave the chalk harness on for the full duration of breeding, but sometimes I will switch colors partway through breeding, because that indicates if you saw a ewe that was chalked up at the beginning and then she gets chalked up again, that probably means the first time didn't take and she's bred the second time. So there's some ways to sort of mostly know if they've been bred or not, just by doing that. And you can also do paired matings or whatever, but it gives you an idea of when they're bred and when to expect them, and it just depends how accurate you need to be on a very individual basis for your sheep. But
great question.
My go-to is ultrasound.
Thank you, Robin. Hi, Pam. Thanks for joining us today. Pam says, what are your recommendations when you have to bottle feed? We have had some fail to thrive on the bottle.
Yeah. So I think for me, I'm like over the top about making sure they get milk on a regular basis. Sometimes if you're not feeding often enough, they're just not getting enough nutrients. Or, they get the big gut because they're trying to fill up on grass or whatever. That bum belly, you know what I'm talking about, that it typically means they're not getting enough milk. So there's a guide if you emailed me, and I should have had you put up my email address.
I'll still make one.
Okay. So it's ellison@uidaho.edu. But I have a great guide as far as how much, if you weigh the lamb and you can feed it 20% of its body weight in ounces, in a 24-hour period. And so it gives you a guide to how much they should be getting. And then you typically want to spread that out over, in the first couple of days. If you feed every 2 to 3 hours, you take that total and divide it out by, 6 or whatever number of feedings you're going to do. And that'll give you an idea of how much to feed at each feeding. And it helps you maintain that, level that they need to be at. That is one of the reasons that I switch to a bucket as soon as I can get them to do it, because then they can eat at will. They can eat whatever they want. And they actually end up looking pretty much like all the rest of the lambs, as long as they didn't have other issues going into. And sometimes at the end of the day, the reason you're bottle feeding might be because they had something going on that they can't overcome even if they were on their mother. So that's something to keep in mind as well. But getting that nutrition in them at the duration of time that they need it is key to making sure that they thrive really well. As far as, I don't know if you're just talking about whether or not they are willing to take the bottle. When they're really young and they've had some issues, if they have trouble suckling on the little black nipples, I'll get those red and yellow ones, and you can cut the top a little bit wider. I mean, be careful not to drown them. But as long as they're receiving the milk without even suckling, and that will encourage them to start, working harder for it. And sometimes you have to wait a little bit in between feedings when they're first getting going, especially if you had to pull them off their mom, because they aren't used to it. It doesn't taste as good as mom's milk. And so you have to get them kind of hungry to get them to want to do it. So hopefully I answered your question. There's a lot of factors.
Thank you, Pam. That's a good question. All right. I think that is this the right email address? Ellison at uidaho.edu. Perfect. So if you have more questions, reach out to Melinda, send her an email, watch some of those YouTube videos, or I believe you can also follow her on Facebook with at UI Sheep and Goats.
Yep.
Well, we are winding down the hour. Is there anything else you'd like to you think people might need to know as they're going into lambing, or things we didn't talk about today that might be helpful?
I think that the biggest one that I always just try to emphasize 500 times till the point where everybody's sick of hearing it is nutrition. I am somewhat trained as a nutritionist, so I know that that's annoying to hear when it's hard to do, but just know that you have resources. And if you can feed your animals to that good balance, you're going to be way ahead of the game when it comes to any of these issues. I mean, making sure that they're in good nutritional status, you have fewer dystocias, fewer weak lamb issues, fewer poor milking issues. And so a lot of this can be, prevented by just making sure they have enough to eat. And of course, if it's really cold, also just being there in case something goes wrong is important. But like I said, I have balanced hundreds of rations for people. So if there's any reason that you aren't going to do it, reach out to me. I will help in any way that I can. All I really need to know is, what size of animal and when are you due to lamb and what are you currently feeding them? And I can give you an idea. So I would say just aim for that status and you'll be in good shape.
Perfect. Healthy mamas equal healthy babies usually.
Also, cull your bad mamas. Don't keep them. Don't keep daughters out of them. Mothering is somewhat heritable, and there's no reason to keep them around if they're going to cause you a bunch of angst and work. So
absolutely, you only get what you put up with. So if you don't want to do it, don't promote it. That might sound a little harsh, but
Oh, it's true. Yeah, I mean, it is. If you want really hardy animals, you have to expect that out of them. And that's one thing you gain by not shed lambing, right? Like mamas have to have babies and raise babies. And when it comes time to decide if she gets to have another baby, if she didn't bring one home at weaning time, she doesn't get to stay. And so that does promote some deeper culling if you're doing it the way you should be doing it. But the same goes for shed lambing, keeping good notes. If you spent a week and a half dealing with somebody and their baby before they were able to go out on their own, that's not a good reason to stick around. So,
absolutely. Good advice. Well, we'll just round everything out because we're about an hour right now. Is there anything, we'll do our shameless plugs. Is there anything you would like to plug, Melinda?
No, just check us out. We have a lot of information to share, and Yeah, we'd love to have you on board with us too. And now that we have this relationship going, hope to be back at some point.
Absolutely. Yeah. This is all great advice, great stuff, great questions today, everyone. Thank you for sending those in. If you have more, please email Melinda. That's Ellison at uidaho.edu. Please check out those awesome, helpful videos on their YouTube channel and look for upcoming things on their Facebook page. A big shout out to all of our members and supporters. Thank you for helping make programming like this possible. You asked for it, so we brought it to you. So we always are looking for feedback and things that you would like to see in the future. So please let us know. You can go to our website. That's livestockconservancy.org. Let me see if I can get it up there. There we go. Send us an email. Let us know what you like, what you don't like, what you want to see, how we can help you in the future. Thank you for supporting educational programming and small farmers and all of our heritage breeds. We appreciate you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I'm going to shamelessly say, if you're not a member, please think about becoming one. You can do that online. It's for like $4 a month if you would like. I think I spend more on coffee. Because I'm a caffeine addict.
Don't we all?
It helps get you through those long lambing nights.
That's right.
But yes, please reach out if you are looking for a mentor for your sheep. We would love to hook you up with somebody. And I hope everyone has a wonderful afternoon. Thanks for sticking around. We'll be back next week with our Marketing Monday series for the month. We'll be talking about branding and how to increase your online branding with one of our experts. Her name is Jennifer Kendall. She's amazing. And she'll get you all set up and ready to go with your small farm. Anyway, have a great one. And thank you to Melinda for joining us today. You were amazing. We appreciate it. And have a great one, everyone. Stay warm.
Thanks. We'll see you guys.